Hello. Hi, everyone. How you doing? My name is Nick Dagan Best. I'm an astrologer. This is an astrology live stream. Um, for those of you who didn't catch my stream yesterday, this has been my solo stream week. Yesterday, Patrick couldn't make our team stream because his mother-in-law had just passed away. And Sam Reynolds can't make it today, but he will be back next Monday. Probably at an hour earlier than my starting time today, so that we can continue this ongoing conversation that we started last weekend, or last Monday rather, with regard to the Venus retrograde Red 5 interval and its relationship with U.S. race relations and history. All right, so once again, I find myself looking at a webcam, talking to people I can't see, the internet tells me you're there, and I believe it. It might be an audience of bots. I don't know. I will have to continue with the presumption that that's not the case. And yeah, I found myself not knowing what the heck to talk about and see what comes up. Hi, Paradigm Shift. Hi, Eleanor B. Hi, everyone. Elsa X, Rev Kai, some of the usual suspects, as they say. I don't know if I want to term anyone with that actually, because yeah, every time you guys turn up, not bots. Okay, I've pissed you all off now. Whoops. Hey, Nick, how do you celebrate Venus retrograde? Oh, I pissed off my whole live stream audience by accusing them of being bots, just as I was getting started, before I could even really screw up. It was China today, wasn't it? I don't know what you mean, crushed orchids. I thought it was Monday. Is China a day of the week? Or is China having a Venus retrograde moment? Is that what you're saying? I looked at the news. I didn't see anything specifically about China. Oh, just you mean the thing we were talking about yesterday, the fact that Henry Kissinger went there to try and ward off the potential war as things are getting intense. Yeah, I suppose that remains to be seen. It is really interesting that at 100 years old, Kissinger would fly out to China. Oh, my sense of humor is part of the charm. Okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was my exaggerated brain. Okay. Oh, you asked what we wanted to talk about. Yeah. So you want to talk about China? Is that right? Yeah, a lot of people said China and Taiwan. Okay. Well, I just haven't made enough charts on my database to really. Let me see. There's one chart. I wonder. Yeah, I do have that. Okay, let's just. I'll talk about what I do have. Okay, and the Venus synodic cycle and Mars and how they interact. That's more along lines of what I think I could handle today. But maybe let's just look at one thing I wanted to mention about China. This is something I kind of wished I had mentioned this when we were covering Vladimir Putin, when I did that video last month following the coup, because yet another red one in the scenario. You'll remember I talked about how people born during the red one intervals are expansionist. And I cited Catherine the Great, Napoleon, Hitler, William Seward, Henry Clay, people like that, and Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, who has his fingers all over different parts of Africa and mining interests and all that stuff. Well, another red one in the picture is Xi Jinping. Henry Kissinger is a white one, but Xi Jinping is a red one. So, yeah, I mean, you don't need to be an astrologer. You don't need to know Xi Jinping is a red one to know that China would really love to incorporate Taiwan, into their one China view of the world. yeah, that remains a sort of lingering problem. That's, I think, a big part of the reason Kissinger is in China now, um, because most of the tension in terms of risks of war have to do with China's desire to claim Taiwan and the United States, stand to protect it. So on the one hand, China owns a lot of American debt, so there's that to consider on China's end of things. On the other end of things, China's been buying Russian weapons that have been shown to not work so great when they're put up against American weapons. The Ukraine war has really sort of cast a new light on Russia's arms building sector and how it's just not up to scratch. So China's probably got buyer's remorse when it comes to buying Russian weapons at this point. And also, as I mentioned yesterday, I've probably mentioned a few times that if China did try to invade Taiwan, first of all, it's not as easy as Russian invading Ukraine. For Russia to invade Ukraine, they just got to drive their tanks and stuff over the border. Taiwan's an island, and an island that has been brewing for 70 plus years to protect itself against China. Yeah, they're well prepared. And Ukraine, it's been argued, has really only been preparing itself for the past 8-10 years or so. So yeah, Taiwan's very well prepared, and if sanctions were leveled against China, if the same kind of sanctions were leveled against China that are leveled against Russia, the country would just shut down too much on food and fuel imports to really survive without them at this point. All right. Apart from that, I think it's really a waiting game. And I don't know how much more I say about it astrologically. Hey, Nick. Hey, Pixie. And your brain too, exaggerating. Okay. Yeah. Crushed Orchid says the countries they loaned money to can't pay them back, and a lot of companies are pulling out, moving to India. Hopefully, they won't have enough money to wage war. Well, that's just it. It's yeah, their hard diplomacy is their hard diplomacy is their soft diplomacy. Buying Russian weapons wasn't about the weapons. Well, I mean, I think it was. I mean, they don't make their own weapons, to my knowledge. So, I mean, they had to buy them from someone. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This is more of an astrology live stream than a foreign policy live stream. Although obviously, I like to, keep the conversation rooted in the real world. And so, we do touch on these different subjects. All right. I think the Venus-Mars connection is something that would be really fun to explore. And I even, somewhere in my files, I have a slideshow about such things that maybe would come in handy now. Let me see. I know I had. Yeah, there we are. All right, I'm going to download a slideshow that I have, and we'll talk about that. Anything on UK? Well, Eleanor, I mean, nothing super up to date. I've spoken about the UK earlier. The one thing I've pointed out is that the last 3 prime ministers of Great Britain were all born during red intervals. Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are red 3 intervals, and Liz Truss is so far Britain's first and only red 5 interval prime minister. And second shortest lived, second shortest term. The only one whose term was shorter was a guy who died. I think it was Canning, who died soon after becoming prime minister. But aside from that, yeah, not a whole hell of a lot. Brexit's still a disaster. So on and so forth. Yeah, loading. It'll be ready in a few seconds, and then I will switch over and we will talk about Venus and Mars. Okay. Yeah, I do think over the course of these next couple of months, I really want to develop all the slideshows so that I can make my live streams, yeah, sort of more visual than they already are. Don't forget to share. Yeah, Elsa, I know. I know. All right. Okay, I've got the slideshow here. So I'm just going to take us through it, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. This is one I made a little while ago. Oh, wait, I don't need to do that. Okay, maybe. I don't know if I've shown this live stream before. If I have. All right, so you guys have seen this from my video. So the Venus synodic cycle is symmetrical. The Mars synodic cycle is asymmetrical. And the reason Mars's synodic cycle is asymmetrical has something to do with its own elliptical orbit around the sun. Here I'm showing the sun's elliptical orbit around the sun, and you can see the Earth is closest to the sun in January, and it's furthest from the sun in July. I think it's the 4th, actually, believe it or not. So whenever America's celebrating its birthday on the 4th of July, it's actually the sun, the Earth is at its furthest distance from the sun at that part of the year. Now, Mars has its own elliptical orbit around the sun, and it's not necessarily a case like its perihelion and its aphelion will occur at different places in its elliptical orbit, different places over the course of its cycle. It's not this sort of one circle like the sun's doing, but because of course we look at the planets from a geocentric perspective, our relative distance to the sun also impacts how we see Mars on the outside. And as a result, when Earth is at its perihelion to the sun in January, this is when you get the most Mars retrogrades during this time. So the sun's in Capricorn, so Mars retrogrades in Cancer, Leo, and Virgo are very common, because during those months of December, January, February, March, we're in the perihelion stage of the Earth's orbit around the sun. And conversely, because the Mars retrogrades in Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces are the most rare, that has to do with the fact that the Earth is furthest from the sun in July. And so during those months, June, July, August, September, when of course Mars retrogrades are when Mars is opposite the sun in a geocentric perspective. That's why they're far less frequent and can take up to 47 years for Mars retrogrades to reoccur in Aquarius or Pisces or Capricorn. So the synodic cycle of Mars combines alternating sums of 15 and 17, arriving at a close zodiacal return at 79. At every successive 79-year interval, Mars transits about 4 to 5 zodiacal degrees earlier than at the previous 79-year interval. So we have 15 plus 17 equals 32. And this is where Venus comes into the picture, because, of course, 32 is also a multiple of 8, and the Venus synodic cycle is 8 years. Then it goes back to plus 15, you get to 47. So you get at 47, you get a pretty tight Mars return, tighter than at 15 or 32. 17 years later, you get to 64. 64, of course, is 2 times 32. And this is another point where the Venus synodic cycle and the Mars synodic cycle sort of meet up in a solar return. And then 15 years later, you get to 79. And 79 is about as close to an exact Mars return as you get time, usually about 4 zodiacal days away from the natal placement at that point. 79 is also a Mercury synodic return. So 79 joins the cycles of Mars and Mercury, which is interesting as well. Okay, so that's how the Mars synodic cycle works. And as I was saying earlier, Mars stations retrograde approximately every 26 months for a duration of approximately 3 months. Mars has 7 races in one 15-year cycle, stationing between 13 to 27 degrees short of a full zodiacal return. Mars retrograde remains in one sign for about half a year, and Mars consistently stations retrograde in tropical Leo and Virgo every 15 to 17 years. Mars retrogrades in the other 9 signs take up to 47 years to recur. I should also add Cancer in there is almost every 15 to 17 years as well. Okay, so this is these are Sun-Mars conjunctions viewed 38 to 2049. And these are Mars-Sun oppositions from 1839 to 2050. And I'm just going to show you go through the signs and you can look. So these are Sun-Mars conjunctions in Aries. And these are also rare. I should add, it's not just that the retrogrades are rare. It's also the Sun-Mars conjunctions in these signs are also quite rare. And this also has to do with the aphelion, perihelion of Earth and how we view Mars. So you can see here in just over 200 years of Sun-Mars conjunctions, there have only been 6 Sun-Mars conjunctions in Aries. And oppositions, these are where the retrogrades are, of course. So the Mars retrograde in Aries, there's also only been 6 over the course of the past 211 years. Or over the course of a total of 211 years. Obviously, it's not just past because this list goes up to 2050. Sun-Mars conjunctions in Taurus, it's slightly more frequent than Aries. Ditto for the oppositions. Well, it's about the same, 6, 7. And then it gradually starts to increase with Gemini. Sun-Mars conjunctions in Gemini and Sun-Mars oppositions in Gemini. We are starting to see the numbers increase here. That's 9. Mars retrogrades in Gemini over the course of 211 years. Cancer, now we're really getting going here. Sun-Mars oppositions with the retrogrades in Cancer, you can see more frequent, certainly more frequent than it was in Aries. Now Leo, now these are the much more frequent Sun-Mars conjunctions. You can see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And the oppositions also quite frequent. And now Virgo, Sun-Mars conjunctions quite frequent. The oppositions, the retrogrades quite frequent. And now we're going to start to see it decrease again. Mars retrograde in Libra, somewhat frequent, but not as much as Leo and Virgo. Ditto for the Mars retrogrades, the oppositions. Scorpio, you can see it starting to decrease. This is the Sun-Mars conjunctions and the Mars retrogrades in Scorpio. Sagittarius, so you can see the numbers are dwindling again. Mars retrogrades in Sagittarius are quite these are the conjunctions, Sun-Mars conjunctions in Sagittarius, quite infrequent. Most of us watching at best have seen maybe 3, if you're over 60 years old. If you're over 62, you've seen 3 Sun-Mars conjunctions in Sagittarius. I'm 54, I've seen 2 of them. And if you were born after 1976, you've only ever seen 1, which was at the end of 2008. And then these are the Sun-Mars oppositions in Sagittarius, the Mars retrogrades in Sagittarius. And once again, okay, so I have seen 3 Mars retrogrades in Sagittarius because I'm 54. The first one was when I was barely a year old, not quite a year old actually, in 1969. And then there was one in 2001, not too long before 9/11. And then there was the famous one in 2016, which coincided with Saturn's transit through Sagittarius. So 2016 is always a year I look out for people who have, say, Sagittarius rising or Sagittarius midheaven, Sagittarius sun. I'm always curious when I'm talking to them what 2016 meant to them, because we can really get a sense of what the Mars Saturn transit, how it impacted them at the time. And here we go to Capricorn. You can see the numbers are really dwindling. These are the Sun-Mars conjunctions in Capricorn, and this is the oppositions. How many Mars retrogrades in Capricorn in the last 211 years? Well, there's been 6. 6 Sun-Mars oppositions in Capricorn in the last 211 years. That's quite something. And in Aquarius, 5. This is by far the least frequent sign for Sun-Mars conjunctions. We did have one back in 2011, and we had one in 1964. The 1964 one's what I call the Beatlemania Sun-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. 2011 was the Arab Spring Sun-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 oppositions in Aquarius. You can see it only happened twice in the 19th century. It only happened once in the 20th century. There was only one Mars retrograde in Aquarius in the 20th century. Kind of to the 1939 one went from early Aquarius into Capricorn, but really, really infrequent. And of course, we had one back in 2018. And then Pisces. You can see the conjunctions and the oppositions, also quite infrequent. We had a Mars retrograde in Pisces in 2003, and prior to that, it hadn't happened since 1956. So again, whenever I see someone with, Pisces rising or a lot of planets in Pisces, I'm always curious about 2003 and what that Mars, because that Mars retrograde in 2003 coincided with Uranus's ingress into Pisces. So this is some of the shorthand that you can find. You find someone with a lot of Pisces, you go to the year 2003. You find someone with a lot of Sagittarius in the chart, you go to the year 2016. You find someone with a lot of Aquarius in their chart, you go to 2018 or 1971. And usually there's some big, consequential and notable moment in the person's timeline during these times. So it's a great sort of shorthand, I'd say, for when you're looking at a chart, and you see certain signs are emphasized. That's kind of how my mind works in consultations, and how this method has really worked well for me. Is certain signs just alert me to certain years, and if I can anchor the chart, if I know what was going on with that person at that particular date, like I said, someone with a lot of Pisces in 2003, someone with a lot of Sagittarius in 2016, so on and so forth, then if you can sort of nail that down, it gives you a much better sense of how the person's life responds to the transits. Because you're going right to the heart of a matter, like what a really strong Mars transit, sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it's not. And so when you are moving forward, and looking ahead in the person's life, you have some sense of how what the planets mean to that person individually. Okay, Solange is asking, what is a red interval? Solange, I would recommend you go back to my YouTube channel and watch a video called The Introduction to the Venus Synodic Cycle, and that'll explain, I think most people who watch this live stream have seen that video. So and that really sort of gets you through the introduction, so that when I do talk on the live stream, I don't have to keep re-explaining that. And there is if you look at the comments of that section of that video, or not the comments, but the description, there's a link to the astro-seek.com Venus interval and phase calculator. And so if you're wondering, after you watch my video and you know what a red one is, what a red interval is, what a white interval is, so on and so forth, then from there, you can go to the astro-seek.com and calculate what, your own Venus interval, or anyone else's that you want to know. And then from there, you can follow my live streams a little easier, because you know what I'm talking about. And okay, so am I planning on doing an introduction to the Mars synodic cycle? Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I just did one a few minutes ago when I was going through the slideshow. Hi, Nick. Don't forget. Don't forget what? Oh dear. Apparently I have forgotten 10 ways. There are 10 different ways I can forget things. Remind me, don't be cryptic with me, please. I don't know what you mean. Let's see here. Okay. Greetings and best regards from rural Colorado near Fort Collins. Okay. Well, hi there, old shop blues boy. Welcome to the live stream. Is there a source for the characteristics of people born under the different Venus intervals? Yeah, GF, this comes up a lot. That is part of what I'm working out now. That's I'm chasing my tail sometimes in this regard because I go on the live stream to sort of in part to talk through these different intervals and get a sense of them. But the process is somewhat slower than a live stream audience necessarily wants it to be. But maybe I will take us through some of my slides and explain some things since we have some new people. Shining Bearable asks, what impact is 6 planets going retrograde going to have? In its own, I mean, the way if I see that many planets retrograde in a chart, what I do is I look at, I have a grid that tells me how many days before and following the date of birth will there be stations of these respective planets. Like, maybe 6 planets are retrograde in the chart, but all of them would go direct, let's say, within the next 40 days, for the sake of argument. And then I look at the secondary progressions of that person, and I see relative to how many days, how many years following the life of birth, will those progressed planets either, station, in this case, if there's 6 retrograde planets, when do they station direct? Do they station direct over the course of a lifetime? Because planets making stations, retrograde or direct stations and secondary progressions, those are very powerful markers. They usually alert you to something really significant in the person's development and their timeline. And so that's how I see the retrograde planets. It's like, okay, these are planets that might be ready to, they might turn over the course. Like, what if they all go direct before the person turns 10? You're going to find a childhood that's just like full of all these changes and chaos and ups and downs and a lot more sort of there'll be sort of peaks and valleys in the timeline as opposed to something more straightforward. Okay. Okay. You guess France's president has lots of retrogrades. Let's see. He definitely has Mars retrograde. He might have a lot. Macron. So yeah, there's the Mars, there's the Saturn, there's the Jupiter, and there's the Mercury in a not quite Cazimi with the Sun. Well, it depends on your definition of Cazimi, I suppose. But yeah, that is a lot of retrograde planets. That's a good example. So let's see here. So Mercury stationed direct 10 days after Macron was born. So I would look at the age of 10, sometime around 1987, 88, to get a sense of what that Mercury station means. Pluto will station retrograde stationed retrograde when he was 28 years old. That might be interesting. Let's see what's 28 for him. 28 would be like 2005, right? Do I have that right? I think so. Yeah. So around 2005, there would be a Pluto station retrograde. And then at the age of 60, Uranus stations retrograde the same year that Jupiter will station direct. Saturn had stationed retrograde just 10 days before he was born. So unless he lives to be over 125 years old, Saturn will never station direct by secondary progression in his life. But 71 is possible. Mars will station direct by secondary progression when he's 71 years old. But, the guy's still in his 40s, not in his 50s or his 60s. So a lot of these are quite a ways away. And who knows if he's even going to be, he probably won't still be prime minister when he's 60. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe he will be. But that's the kind of thing I think about when I'm looking at retrograde planets. I'm looking at how they change. It's not, to me, it's not really merely just a question of whether or not they're retrograde or not, but are they going to change over the course of a person's lifetime? Otherwise, the planet really just has its own sort of place in the chart, and it's probably not going to, whether it's retrograde or direct, if there's no shift in that direction, then the person's going to be living with the planet moving in the same direction over the course of their whole life. And you don't get that same sort of dynamic of peaks and valleys. You don't get the same sort of intrusions in the timeline, if you will, for want of a better word. Okay. Well, thank you, Modern Goldilocks. I hope you like the porridge. I'm sorry. I'm a dad. I have license to dad joke. Okay, so getting to the Venus and Mars thing, maybe we look at some solar returns for the age of 32 or 64. Let me see what I can think of here. Who do I know? Who do I know who has a life? Let's just go through my general natal file. Get a sense of this. I have to think hard here. Think hard and think fast. I do have quite the boatload of people in this file. Who do I know is 32? Let me see. Yesterday I was talking about this guy. 32 for him would be 1945. That's not quite a good one. Bear with me, folks. I want to do this. I want to do right by you. And oh yeah. I know I can use. This is a pretty good one. Although I did cover this one with Chris on one of his podcast episodes, but it might have been an informal podcast episode, which is just for his patrons. So a lot of you might not have seen it. Okay, so this is George Lucas's chart. My apologies if you don't like Star Wars, but it's not really relevant. You don't need to like Star Wars or care about George Lucas for this example to speak to you. That's always an important thing to keep in mind. So yeah, this is his solar return. If I'm not mistaken, no, that's not the solar return. I clicked the wrong one. Sorry, I meant to have this one. Okay. So George Lucas turned 32 while he was filming Star Wars. To be most precise, this birthday occurred when they were filming the scene at the end of the movie where Princess Leia gives awards. It's like after the Death Star is blown up and all that. There's this sort of award ceremony, the triumph at the very end of the movie. and they were filming that, which by no means was the end of the film shoot. The film was not filmed in sequence. In fact, the last part of the movie to be filmed is the beginning of the movie when the Empire boards that ship looking for the droids, and they capture Princess Leia and all that. That's filmed at the very end of the shoot. So this is in the middle of the film shoot. The filming started in March. We're now in May. It's not going to finish till July, I think. And now we know that George Lucas's life is about to be amazing. He's about to become really rich and really successful and change culture with this film. I mean, really make this unbelievable impact on culture and how it develops with this movie. And again, maybe you love Star Wars, maybe you hate Star Wars, but I think this is sort of an objectively true statement. So even if you just despise Star Wars and you hate George Lucas's guts, I'm still saying something that's basically true, and it doesn't matter what you think. And if you love him, it also doesn't matter what you think. Your love is irrelevant. We're just looking at, we're looking at life through his eyes. So our perspectives are irrelevant. That's in one sense, reading a chart really involves that level of detachment. I feel, you can only sort of judge things through the eyes of the person whose chart you're looking at, not through your own. Ideally, anyway, in practice, anyway. Obviously, really abandoning your perspective, your ego, all that stuff isn't as easy as I'm making it sound. But there is that pretense, and I think that pretense makes a difference. All right, so this is what you get at 32. If you run the 30-second solar return for anybody, for yourself or anyone you will find that Venus is very close to the natal position within just a few degrees, and ditto for Mars. But the interesting thing in this case was Saturn also happened to be conjunct Mars and basically conjunct transiting Mars and natal Mars when George hit his 32nd birthday. And this really is like, we know his life is going to be great next year when the movie comes out. But until the movie comes out, he just thinks he's ruining his life. Everything's going wrong. He's, nobody but he believes in the movie. And even he's got his doubts that it's going to turn out to be any good. He knows he has a vision. He knows what he wants, but he's really doubtful. And it's going to get worse after this, because after the shoot in July, he's going to go back to California and discover that that the special effects he's already expecting. He started a special effects company a year or two earlier to prepare for Star Wars. And he thinks they're going to have dozens or hundreds of shots accomplished while he's been filming in England and filming like all the live action stuff with the actors. And he's going to find out actually they only have 1 or 2 shots and they're way behind. And there's a lot of technological snafus and things going wrong that he's going to have to fix and straighten out. And he literally, actually, right around that time in early August, I mean, he's only 32 years old, but he goes to a doctor thinking he's having a heart attack. And the doctor just tells him to take it easy. So I don't know. Being 32 years old, if you think you're having a heart attack, chances are you're really under a lot of stress, which is what he was under. 32 is a 9th house perfection year. So I think that's the other thing is, you want to see how the 9th house comes into the picture. And for him, the 9th whole sign house is Capricorn, where he does have the midheaven. And the ruler of Capricorn, of course, is Saturn, which is here with his Mars. So that Saturn is really, really, really sort of running the show this particular year. And of course, being the 9th house, George is in England. A lot of his problems at this point right now are kind of 9th house problems because he's working with a British film crew, ostensibly for their expertise and to save money. But He's not used to working with them. They have this, they have very strict union rules and how, they won't work overtime no matter what. And they break for tea, which is infuriating to a North American who thinks that, the workday should just, you have a lunch break, sure, but a tea break? What are you, commies? Anyway, long story short, a lot of his problems really are sort of ninth house related, at least at this point in the shoot, before he goes back to California and has to deal with, his local problems down there in the third house. So yeah, this is and you'll find no matter whose chart you look at, like I said, the 32nd birthday reveals something about the Venus and Mars. Now, the clincher for George, of course, I mean, he's a Taurus sun, Taurus rising with Venus and Taurus, and that Venus is obviously, really, really nice and strong in his chart. And it'll be the following year, that right now Jupiter is on his Venus, which at least ensures that he's making something of quality. I mean, you can see that his future, that the movie he's making, astrologically, you get a sense that actually, despite the fact that he thinks everything is failing and it's not going well, actually, of course, things are going well. He just has to persevere in a very Saturnian way. He has to overcome the obstacles and work that much harder and push himself to the brink, but it will work. He will make Star Wars, and our childhoods, certainly my childhood, will be all the richer for it. And his wallet will be all the richer for it. Right. I do want to say that, while this Venus and Taurus is really nice and strong, the fact that it squares the moon, this is kind of the roughest aspect in his chart, believe it or not. The moon square Venus can be a really difficult aspect in a chart. Moon square Venus implies that there can be some really insufferable compromises that need to be made. I call it the Sophie's Choice aspect because it's like, the movie Sophie's Choice. She's in a concentration camp and she has to give up. She has two children and she has to sacrifice one of the children's lives in order to save the other child. Just an impossible thing. And George Lucas's life is also like that. He is loath to compromise, and yet life forces him over and over to compromise. This is the studios giving him a hard time over THX and then American Graffiti. And then even when Star Wars comes out and he's got to, he makes the next two Star Wars movies and then sort of stops making Star Wars movies because they just can't look the way he wants them to until CGI is invented and all that stuff. He's just done trying to like creatively not quite reach what he thinks is the standard these movies should be at. And then, of course, once he does eventually come back to make the Star Wars movies, he's he's greeted by some very irate old fans who, built him up only to tear him down. All right, so let's see here. Miley Cyrus turns 32 next year. Probably one to watch. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Love is irrelevant. Hey, that's I said love is irrelevant in this context. I'm not saying it's irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, nothing says a long time ago in a galaxy far away like that I see. This is true. Anna B says daily tea breaks are important, UK based. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, it's giving George a hard time when he's making the movie and the crew has to break for tea. I think tea is fine. THX was good, underrated. Yeah, I love THX. Yeah. No, exactly. I'm, my only point in saying that love is irrelevant, like I only really like the first two Star Wars movies. I'm not much of a Star Wars fiend, but I do find George Lucas, I have a lot of respect for him as a filmmaker. His whole career, if you know about his I mean, he was really, when he was young, he was like this rebellious avant-garde guy. He wanted to make tone poems. So the fact that he became this like super commercial, mainstream creator. Oh no, Crushed Orchids got skipped again. I'm sorry. I'll get back to you. The fact that he became this sort of mainstream figure is really ironic if you have a sense of who he was as a young guy making these sort of tone poem films. How did Crush Orchids get skipped again? I said, the hell did I miss here? Oh, you have a good Venus retrograde story for a good teaching example. Okay, well, I tend to, I don't know, but Watson and I have different feelings. I'm not always looking for personal stories, but well, maybe I should let you go ahead and tell us Crushed Orchids. But to answer Elsa X's question, so 32 will be a year to look at how Venus and Mars will interact for everyone. At the age, yeah, look, in particular, if you have charts where Venus and Mars have some kind of dynamic aspect between the two, then you really know 32 is going to be a very consequential age. And whatever the, someone like George Lucas, because that Venus is right there on the ascendant and rules the chart. Well, you know that at 32, then it's in a sextile to Mars by sign. So you know that, at the age of 32, there's going to be some sort of fusion of fortune and struggle, which I think is true of his thing. Astrology Pod just did a Venus retrograde war story episode. Okay, I don't know what you mean about that. Okay, Crushed Orchid says, I have Mars in Taurus in the 11th and Uranus opposing in Scorpio on the 5th. Every other year, Mars will make a T-square to those planets while in my second house. Okay. The year I had Venus retrograde in my second and Uranus only a week away from an exact conjunction with natal Mars as well as the same time. Okay. Okay, I don't know where if Crushed Orchids is going to keep, if we're going somewhere with that. But yeah, that's kind of the difficult thing about doing. Then we're standing by waiting for someone to type. Oh yes, Elsa X. That video is yeah, the latest astrology podcast video. You're right, I did see that. Okay, the live thing that Chris did at the Mercury Theater. Yeah, that's a good video worth watching. I just put out. Oh, okay. I see where Crushed Orchids is going with this. I had my PlayStation Network account hacked, and they tried to put 5 $70 games on my credit card and PayPal. I almost immediately. All right. Yeah, this is a good story, but it's not really good for the flow of the live stream. Waiting to type it all out. Although I don't know, I'm still figuring my way around this live stream thing. This is why I do like to mostly talk about other people, because then I have people whose biographies I can read and look at the life as a whole. Like, even though I was talking about George Lucas at the age of 32, I mean, I've studied him up until present day. So that even that 32nd birthday of his, I have the context of knowing, how things have unfolded since then. Okay, so yeah, Crushed Orchids had to change a different credit card number, account for 23 years. Bank account was frozen until they figure out. Okay. All right. Okay, Crushed Orchids. There's a 200 character limit for chat. Yeah, this is I mean, thank you. I think I find that the personal stories to be the anecdotes to be a distraction for 50 people watching. it's just probably not the best format for that kind of conversation. But again, I'm still figuring out exactly how to do this whole live stream thing. Okay. I'm trying to figure out what to do next. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just distracted. Yeah, let's maybe just not do personal anecdotes because it's more distracting. I can see how it's. I'm speaking about Mars and Venus every 32 years. Oppenheimer or Chris Nolan. Yeah, I'm in the middle of reading American Prometheus right now, and immediately following that, I will read The Making of the Atom Bomb by Richard Rhodes, and then Atoms and Ashes by Serhii Plokhy about nuclear disasters. And after I've read those three, I'm going to make a bunch of charts relating to the history of atomic energy and the bomb. No, I haven't talked about Twitter changing the name yet. I do cover sort of update. I'm not always going to just respond to the latest events. Sometimes I'll talk about some geopolitical things and what's going on at the time. But mostly I like to look at the past where we have perspective, where we can look at things a little more with some distance. I don't always want to change, sort of chase the headlines. Yeah, I know Twitter is changing their logo to X, and it's it's hilarious because it seems they're going to get themselves confused with pornography sites or something like that. Yeah, no. Crushed Orchid says, "No worries." Somebody asked about non-famous people a while back. Most people can't really relate to those particular lifestyles. Yeah, I think I'm not so much interested in famous people, but I'm interested in people. The thing about famous people that's useful is being able to having access to a detailed timeline of an individual. So the good thing about famous people is we know, where they were, what they were doing for most of the years of their lives. Even if they're only famous for like one or two events, they're famous enough that we can look at them from birth to death and really get a sense of things. And so that's really why I'm most attracted to using historical charts. It's just you can access more information. Oh, Brian Auger is the British era musician. No, I haven't studied him. I'll have to look at him sometime. Eminence factora. I don't know. The whole eminence thing is not applicable to every single famous person, I think. It's fair enough for like royals and things like that, people just sort of born into privilege. But I think in other cases it's a lot more subtle. Yeah, I think there's this tendency to think of famous people as being sort of special or something to that nature. I don't see. I never see them like that. Even if they're royals, I just see them as ordinary people. And the eminence thing is some kind of weird accident, maybe an accident that we account for astrologically, but still, I find them all sort of relatable in some way, even the villains in history, you know. Yeah, Elsa X is asking, can I do a deep dive in red fives and see what the interval we're in? That's a good idea. I need to focus here. Sometimes maybe, whoops. Sometimes maybe I'm just too responsive to comments and I get kind of scatterbrained and forget what I'm trying to do. Let's see here. I know I just had red fives. So this is the red 5 interval. This is the interval that we're in right now. You can see at the bottom right, second from the bottom right, the Venus, the red 5 interval began on June 1st this year, and it ends on October 25th. Excuse me, once Venus reaches 15 Virgo. And if this grid goes all the way back to the year 1687. And the great thing about this grid is it gives you the sense of how Venus gradually moves backward through the zodiac with every 8-year return. So at the top left there, you see 1687. The red interval began at 1 degree Scorpio and ended at 25 Sagittarius. And between 1687 and the year 2023, Venus has gone through, nearly a third of the zodiac, going backward through the signs. But this is what the red interval traces, is just the Venus cycle itself. It's not connected to the zodiac. It just sort of it's adjacent to the zodiac and has its own sort of rhythm and movement. Let's see here. Maybe I'll just quickly. This next thing is from the video, so you can see Venus. This is the 2023 retrograde. There we are in July. It's turning around. It makes its interior conjunction with the sun. And then turns around and moves forward. You can see here it's going to go right up until, I think it's October 25th. Yeah, there we are. Okay. Now, people born during the red 5 interval, and then there's Liz Truss, who I mentioned earlier, second to last British Prime Minister. Scott Walker, who was the governor of Wisconsin. Neil Gorsuch, the only red 5 appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court ever, interestingly. Joe Rogan's a red 5, Ben Carson. So obviously something about red 5 and believing silly things. Robin Williams, Joni Mitchell, H. Rap Brown, Lech Walesa. A lot of important Polish figures are red 5 or blue 5. Robert Gates, who had been Secretary of Defense, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, Robert Crumb, the cartoon artist, Robert De Niro, Abigail Folger, who was one of the Manson family victims, Mick Jagger, Gordon Strachan, who was one of the people who was indicted, but he actually got away during the Watergate scandal. He's one of the people caught up in the net of lies. Christine McVie, the late great Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac, was a red 5. Stevie Nicks is a red 3. Jerry Lee Lewis, Abdou Diouf, who was the second president of Senegal, very important intellectual. Eldridge Cleaver of the Black Panther Party. Geraldine Ferraro, the first woman to run for vice president. Ron Paul. Whoops, what the hell just happened here? What the hell just happened? Okay. John Cazale, who was a really gifted actor. He acted in 5 movies and then died. He was Meryl Streep's boyfriend when she wasn't famous. But all 5 movies he was in were nominated for Best Picture at Oscars. He was in Godfather 1, Godfather 2. You know, he played Fredo, the brother, Al Pacino's older brother, who sort of gets overlooked. He was in Coppola's The Conversation. He was in Dog Day Afternoon, also with Al Pacino, and he was in The Deer Hunter. And all 5 of those movies were nominated for Best Picture Oscars. Yeah, very gifted actor. Benjamin Civiletti, he was an attorney general, I think under Clinton. Jack Kemp, former congressman. The Dalai Lama is a Red 5. George Bezos, who's a really important figure in South Africa. He was the Rivonia trial defense attorney. So he was Mandela and the attorney for Nelson Mandela, or one of the attorneys for Nelson Mandela and all the other defendants in the Rivonia trial, where they were sentenced to life in prison in 1964. Another Secretary of Defense, William Perry. I think there's a few Secretary of Defenses born with Red 5s. Yeah, there's another one, Harold Brown, also a U.S. Secretary of Defense, born during a Red 5. So it's a pretty common thing. You saw Robert Gates earlier. Rosalind Carter, First Lady of the USA, she's a Red 5. This guy, Anatoly Dobrynin, he was the Soviet ambassador to the U.S., also a Red 5. His predecessor had been a Blue 5. There's a lot of Blue 5, Red 5 in the Soviet diplomacy game. The former Shah of Iran, the second Shah, the one who was overthrown in the revolution. Pierre Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, father of Justin Trudeau. He was Prime Minister when I was born and for the first 16 years of my life. George Wallace, former governor of Alabama and, warrior for the segregationist cause. This is Choi Kyu-ha. He was the president of South Korea, and he resigned after an uprising. This is a chancellor of West Germany, Walter Scheel. William Kunstler, famous civil rights activist and lawyer. He defended Lenny Bruce in the, when he was charged for using swear words on stage. And he also defended the Chicago 8, after the Chicago Democratic Convention. Putin's mother, Maria Ivanovna Putina. Konstantin Chernenko, who was one of the later general secretaries of the Soviet Union. He was just before Gorbachev. He only served like a year and then he died. This is one of these Nazis who managed to escape the hangman's noose for some reason. This was the prosecuting attorney during the Rivonia trial. I showed you George Bezos earlier, who was an attorney for Nelson Mandela. This is the guy who helped put Mandela in prison. Although later when Mandela was released from prison, he went to visit Percy Uttar and, sort of forgave him, made friends with him, that kind of thing. Quite an amazing story there. Georges Pompidou, the 19th president of France. France has had more Red 5 presidents than any of the other Venus intervals. Here's another attorney general, Howard McGrath, a lot of presidential candidates. The third state president of South Africa. This guy was mostly just a figurehead in the South African government. Soviet Minister of Defense, Marshal of the Soviet Union. This is Andrei Grechko, one of the higher-ups in the Soviet Union. And then we get into the Nazis. This guy, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, was executed, following the Nuremberg trials. He was a childhood friend of Adolf Eichmann, who eventually would also get hanged, although he would escape for another 16 years before it happened. Estes Kefauver, this was a senator. He was quite an important sort of liberal senator in the South, one of the few who went and signed the Southern Manifesto in 1957. William Tubman, this was a president of Liberia, who he died in 71, and sort of his death was the beginning of Liberia sort of starting to unravel politically, where the ruling class, the Americans, were losing their grip on the local population. Yet another Soviet, Anastas Mikoyan. This guy was really important in the Soviet Union as a sort of, especially when it came to foreign diplomacy, like Cuba, relations with Cuba, he was really important in that whole sort of situation, for instance, the Soviet relationship with Cuba. Yeah, this was, he was the brother of the king of Bulgaria, and he was executed by the Nazis, Prince Kirill of Bulgaria. And then someone else executed. This was the oldest daughter of the Tsar of Russia, and she was murdered by Bolsheviks in the basement with the rest of her family, her sister's brother and parents. Juan Perón, who was the president of Argentina, you know, his wife was Eva Perón, who Madonna played in the movie Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, all that stuff. He was a Red 5, overthrown in a coup d'etat, but restored 18 years later. Another Canadian prime minister, I showed you Trudeau earlier, Pierre Trudeau. One of his predecessors, John Diefenbaker, was also a Red 5 interval. Robert Lovett, another Secretary of Defense. And this guy was also, well, he was important during the Second World War, but he had a hand, I think, in the internment of American citizens, you know, like Japanese Americans and stuff. He had a hand in that whole plot. Yet another U.S. Attorney General, James McGranary. So you see there's quite a few like U.S. Ministers of Defense and Attorney Generals, really, really common with Red 5s. Ernst Röhm, who was, this guy was a Nazi, but he was too much of a Nazi for Hitler, who had him assassinated. He was sort of a rival to Hitler, really brutal guy. But interestingly, also gay, and a lot of his sort of upper echelon with his brown shirts were also gay. And so Hitler sort of, you know, Hitler had many flaws, but he wasn't necessarily homophobic, but he used homophobia to, you know, as a pretense to get rid of all these guys. He had the massacre in what was calling the Night of the Long Knives. This is an Irish Republican revolutionary named Joseph Plunkett. He's one of the 7 signatories of the Easter Rebellion Declaration of the Irish Republic. He went into the rebellion even though he was in really fragile health because of tuberculosis, and he was executed along with all his compatriots in that revolution. I've covered this before in conversation, but out of the 7 signatories of the Eastern Rebellion occurred during a Red 3 interval, as Venus was going to go retrograde in Cancer. But at least 5, probably 6 of the 7 men who signed their name to the Irish Republican Declaration were born during Red intervals. At least 5 out of the 7, probably 6, because one of them has an iffy birth year, but it leans toward the Red one. This is Bernard Montgomery. He was the British military leader during the Second World War. So he was like sort of Eisenhower's or George Marshall's sort of equivalent, I believe you would say. Chiang Kai-shek, who was the head of the Kuomintang. We were talking about Taiwan earlier. This is the guy who sort of founded Taiwan. Of course, before that, it was the island of Formosa. There was an indigenous population living there, and then these Chinese Republicans moved in there and made it this sort of other China, if you will. So he was Mao's nemesis. This is Joseph Tiso. He was the president of the First Slovak Republic. He was a Catholic priest and a Nazi collaborator. So he was, Slovakia was part of Eastern Europe that was more welcoming to the Nazis when they came in. And so he was, after the war, he was executed for that. This is a not very well-known U.S. presidential candidate. He was the governor of Kansas. His name was Alf Landon. This is another, Nazi German who was not executed, who managed to live out his life after the war. This is the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. He was just at the very end of the First World War. I think it was his great uncle died. Not Franz Ferdinand. What's the guy's name is slipping whoever it was, the guy who was emperor of Austria-Hungary the Habsburg, the second to last Habsburg, and he was in power from 1848 till he died in 1916, which is amazing. But then this guy came in just at the tail end, as just in time for the Habsburg crown to come apart completely. And this is a second Irish Republican revolutionary. Arguably, this is the guy who actually read the Republican Declaration. This is Patrick Pearse. So two of the not only were 5 and probably 6 of the Irish Republican revolutionaries who signed the proclamation, not only were they all read intervals, but 2 of the 7 were read 5 intervals, which is also just very, very interesting to me. And I think we get into a bunch of revolutionaries here. Yeah, there we are. Trotsky, also a red 5. I showed you Chiang Kai-shek earlier, who was a red 5, and he was Mao's nemesis. Mao's a red 4, and then Trotsky's a red 5, and he was, at least at certain points, Lenin's nemesis, and Lenin was a red 4. There's kind of a theme going on there. This was the Prime Minister of Hungary, Paul Teleki, who committed suicide as the Germans were going into Hungary, because he probably would have been tortured or executed by the Nazis anyway. Franz von Papen, the guy who he wasn't Hitler's enemy, but he was definitely not Hitler's supporter either, but he was kind of on the fence. He managed to get through without being executed during the Night of the Long Knives, but probably by the skin of his teeth did he survive. This is another Weimar German politician. So this is the era between the First and Second World Wars. This is Emperor Taisho of Japan. He apparently had neurological problems, and he didn't appear in public much. He was before Hirohito, but after sort of the reform of 1868. Ethel Barrymore. This is Drew Barrymore's great aunt, I think you would say, her grandfather's sister. And she was a famous actress. And Winston Churchill at one point wanted to marry her when they were both young. Speaking of revolutionaries, Emiliano Zapata, who was a Mexican peasant revolutionary, eventually assassinated in 1919, but he was, an important figure in the Mexican Revolution. Yet another, okay, so I showed you Secretary of Defense. Before we had a Secretary of Defense in the US, we had a Secretary of War. So it's basically the same position. It was just the name was changed, and there was a bit of shuffling of how the cabinet worked. But this is Dwight Davis, who was the Secretary of War. And another Secretary of War, Newton Baker. So like I said, we're seeing a lot of these red 5s in the Defense Department. Lenin's youngest sister, Olga Ulyanov. The Ulyanov was a family of revolutionaries. Lenin was not the only revolutionary in the family. They were all revolutionaries, and there's a lot of red intervals in his family as well. He was a red 4, as I mentioned, and his youngest sister, Olga, is a red 5. Cordell Hull, who was Secretary of State under Roosevelt, but he was kind of frozen out by Roosevelt. Roosevelt had him in his cabinet, I think, for political reasons more than for his actual confidence in Hull. But Hull is sometimes called the father of the United Nations, because he was Secretary of State during the war, during most of the war. I think he resigned in 1943, but he was instrumental in help setting up the United Nations. The 5th president of Cuba, Gerardo Machado. And he was a military general during the Cuban War of Independence. So you get a sense again of this, there's a lot of sort of martial stuff with the red 5. Badoglio, who was the Prime Minister of Italy, he was sort of Mussolini's nemesis, Mussolini was a blue 5 and Badoglio is a red 5. And it was during the red 5 transit of 1943 that Mussolini was taken down and Badoglio was installed. Now that Italy was switching over to the Allies, this was Badoglio was part of that Italy, the retaliating against Mussolini force and all that. Albert Lebrun, who I mentioned earlier, Francis had more presidents born during the Red 5 interval than any of the other intervals. And he was the last president of the Third French Republic, just before the Germans, well, as the Germans invaded and installed the Vichy regime, is when he was overthrown. Karl Liebknecht, he was, again, we have revolutionaries. We have a lot of this. We have a lot of like, secretaries of defense, secretaries of war, but conversely, we have a lot of revolutionaries born during the Red 5 interval. I've shown you, two of the Irish ones, Trotsky, Zapata, but Karl Liebknecht is also an important revolutionary. He was the co-founder of the Spartacist League with Rosa Luxemburg, and he was assassinated during the German Revolution of 1918-1919 as the war ended. This is a prime minister of France, not a president, but a prime minister born during Red 5. Another prime minister of France. This guy was prime minister when the First World War broke out. He was a Red 5 interval. And so many people involved in the First World War were born during red intervals. That's a whole video I got to make just about that. The last king of Portugal, who was assassinated at the creation of the Portuguese Republic. He was assassinated in 1908. Someone else who was executed, this was the grandson of Tsar Nicholas I, and he was imprisoned and assassinated by the Bolsheviks in 1919. Yet another president of France born during the Red 5 intervals. I told you, France has a lot of presidents born during the Red 5 interval. This is like the third or fourth one we've come up against at least. Eugene Debs, talking about revolutionaries. Well, I don't know if Debs is a revolutionary. He was an activist for sure, but he was jailed during the First World War for denouncing the First World War, and ran for president from prison, which is something we might see someone else do in the not so distant future. I'm just going to pause for a sec, see how you're all doing with the comments here. I don't know if I'm losing you or if people are interested in this or if they want me to talk about other stuff. Okay. Franz Joseph. Yeah, I think you're right, LSX. Diplomacy, relationships, the Shah, what a leader, yes. John Cazell. Okay, so far so good. And people are mostly, okay, people are loving it. Frozen Out by Roosevelt sounds like a diss track by MC Teddy. Yeah, Adam, you're right there. It really does. Okay. So back to the slideshow, if you guys are digging it. So here's a vice president of the U.S. This is James Sherman. He actually died while in office, and he died October 1912, just as the election was happening. He was Taft's vice president. And he died just before Woodrow Wilson won the election. So it doesn't really help in an election if the vice president suddenly dies. Right. So he's a Red 5. This is someone who escaped assassination. I've shown you a lot of people who were sort of executed or assassinated, royals or other people who've been executed. Tsarina Maria Feodorovna of Russia. She's actually a Danish princess. What's her name? Dagmar, Princess Dagmar of Denmark. She married she was engaged. Actually, it's interesting. She was engaged to the heir to the Russian throne, but he died, and so she wound up marrying his younger brother, who became the Tsar. And she's the mother of Tsar Nicholas I. And so much of her family was wiped out in the Russian Revolution. She managed to escape. She was rescued by the British in Crimea. They came by and rescued her in a ship shortly before the Soviets came down to Crimea, and then definitely would have executed her. Her son and grandchildren were shot in a basement. And then other sort of members of her family were, thrown down wells, or shot in firing squads and that kind of thing. So it's all quite brutal. And yet another president of France born during a Red 5 interval. I wasn't kidding, folks. It's like twice as many Red 5 interval presidents as any other interval. I think I can put up I have a grid I can show you later. A lot of French presidents have been red 5 intervals. Macron isn't, but a lot of them are. Paul von Hindenburg, yeah, maybe Hindenburg is most familiar to you as a name of the Zeppelin that crashed in 1937. Well, it was named after this guy, who he'd been chief of the German staff during he was an important military leader during the First World War. And then afterwards, he was president of the German Reich just until, Hitler became chancellor while Hindenburg was president. Hindenburg didn't want to make him chancellor, but he basically had to. And then Hitler just really waited for Hindenburg to die. And as soon as Hindenburg died, Hitler seized total power, and then he was the Führer of Germany. So this guy's, sort of the last domino to fall before Hitler took total power. Revolutionaries. This is another important revolutionary, a nihilist revolutionary. Oh, it says I made an interesting typo here. I said he's an evolutionary. No, Nick, he's not an evolutionary astrologer or anything like that. He's a revolutionary. Yeah, nice way to catch a typo. Nechayev, yeah, he's sort of an important inspiration for later Russian revolutionaries, and he inspired Dostoevsky's book Demons, which is about revolutionaries and Dostoevsky's anxiety about that. This is a prime minister of Russia who, he was murdered during the war, I think by the Bolsheviks. And someone else murdered by Bolsheviks. President, I think this is the only red 5 president ever, James Garfield. And of course, he was the second president to be assassinated in 1881. And only sitting member of Congress to be elected president. I'd forgotten about that detail. But yeah, there you are, red 5 president. He was shot during his first year in presidency, but a lot of people thought he would have been really good if he'd managed to live. Kaiser Friedrich of Germany. So this is the father of Kaiser Wilhelm II, and he's the son of Kaiser Wilhelm I. And he served briefly as the Emperor of Germany because his father, Kaiser Wilhelm I, lived to be so old that by the time he died, Friedrich was already dying of throat cancer. And so he served a very short time as the Emperor of Germany, and then he died of the throat cancer that he was already dying of by the time he became emperor. And his son, Kaiser Wilhelm, then became emperor. It's called the Year of the Three Emperors, 1888, and he's the second of the three. He was seen as sort of a liberal voice in the German monarchy, and definitely Germany would have taken a very different course if he hadn't died of lung cancer and his son hadn't sort of taken over, because that was quite a disaster. And his son was a red 2 interval, by the way. Yet another Secretary of War with the red 5 intervals. How many? I haven't been keeping count. Somewhere I do have a slide of all the U.S. Secretaries of War and Secretaries of Defense. And we can look at them overall and get a sense of how many red 5s there have been, but there really are a lot. This is a first lady. I was talking about first ladies a couple of weeks ago. This is Lucy Webb Hayes, the wife of Rutherford B. Hayes. First lady with a college degree, and she was an advocate for racial equality. But they also called her Lemonade Lucy. She didn't allow alcohol in the White House, so they called her Lemonade Lucy. I showed you Lenin's younger sister was a red 5. Well, so was his father. His father, Ilya Ulyanov, father to the whole Ulyanov revolutionary clan, was a red 5. This is a prince of Serbia who was assassinated in 1868, Mihailo Obrenović. Really important figure in Serbian history. He was assassinated in 1868. There's quite a theme with Serbia and the red intervals, and that's another thing I could sort of go into at some point. There's some really interesting stuff there. Yet another U.S. Secretary of War born during a red 5 interval, Alexander Ramsey. So yeah, I'm not kidding, folks. Oh, this guy's interesting. Charles Francis Adams is a red 5 interval. He was the ambassador to the United Kingdom during the Civil War, and he's actually the sort of first of all, he's the grandson of John Adams, and he's the son of John Quincy Adams. So his father and his grandfather were presidents. He's the ambassador to England, and his counterpart, the foreign minister in Britain, is the future prime minister. It's Lord Russell. He's the grandfather of Bertrand Russell, the famous scientist and philosopher and anti-nuclear advocate. So John Adams' grandson and Bertrand Russell's grandfather, were sort of paired there. And this was really important because in the first half of the American Civil War, Britain and France weren't entirely sure. They were sort of standing by. They were quasi-neutral. They were trading with both sides. But they very easily could have come in on the side of the Confederacy, which would have been disastrous for the Union. But Charles Francis Adams and Lord Russell sort of really managed to smooth things out until at least when the Emancipation Proclamation was declared. And then Britain really did have to stay out of the war because they already had this anti-slavery policy. And so as soon as the Civil War was specifically made about slavery, Britain had to keep out. But until that happened, Adams was really the guy sort of representing the Union in Great Britain, and did a good job of keeping Britain out of wanting to join in on the side of the Confederacy. And yet another president of France born during a red 5 interval. I'm not kidding. Secretaries of War, French presidents, there's a lot of them. This one is considered to be the first true Republican president of France. He's the 4th president of France. Napoleon's second wife, Mary Louise, she's an Austrian princess. It's funny, she's Napoleon's wife, but she's so young, because Josephine was too old to have children, and Napoleon had to have a child. So he married a young princess so that Napoleon by this point had crowned himself emperor. So of course he has to have a royal wife. And he marries Mary Louise, and they do have a child, Napoleon III, who Napoleon II, rather, who won't live long enough to ever, see that title realized. But she's so young that she's born after the French Revolution began. But she marries Napoleon, before it can really end, so to speak. And speaking of Napoleon, his older brother Joseph was a red 5. Napoleon himself was a red 1. There's some really interesting Venus stuff. Someday I'll do an episode just on Napoleon and the Bonaparte family, because there's some really interesting Venus interval stuff in that family. This guy, I think he came up not too long ago. He's a lover of Catherine the Great, and he's one of the co-conspirators against who murdered Tsar Paul I, Catherine the Great's son. And now we're in the French Revolution. Louis Saint-Just, he was a member of the Committee for Public Safety. Oh, what's going on with my friggin' slideshows? Stop it. I don't know why that's happening. He's a really young guy. During the French Revolution, he's in his mid-20s. He's one of Robespierre's sort of allies, and he's executed alongside Robespierre. Whenever you see movies or TV dramas about the French Revolution, Saint-Just is always played by some brooding, sexy male model who's got like hair in his eyes, kind of thing. You can always tell. Saint-Just is, here in this painting, he kind of just looks like an ordinary young guy, but he's always portrayed by these sort of brooding, beautiful guys, male models, and there's a kind of a menacing figure, at least until he winds up at the guillotine alongside Robespierre. And Robespierre was a red 4. There's a few red 5s. Earlier I was talking about Chiang Kai-shek and Trotsky being red 5s, and there's also this is someone else who was executed at the guillotine alongside Saint-Just and Robespierre. François Henriot was a Jacobin revolutionary and a chief of the Paris National Guard. So yeah, a number of red intervals in the French Revolution, and there's also another guy, Hérault de Seychelles, who was a member of the Committee for Public Safety. He was executed a little earlier on April 5th alongside Danton, and Danton himself was a red 5 interval. So you get all this stuff. Danton was a red 5 interval. He's sort of the same thing to Robespierre that you might say Trotsky is for Lenin or Chiang Kai-shek is for Mao. You get this thing between the red 4 revolutionary and the red 5 revolutionary, where sometimes they're allies and sometimes they're nemesis. Danton was, went to the chopping block, and as he was being wheeled past Robespierre's house, he yelled out, "Hey, Robespierre, you're next." And sure enough, 3 months later, Robespierre was next. Also, Danton had this really big head. And so just before he had it chopped off, he said to the executioner, "Show my head to the people. It's worth it." And it probably was. This is the wife of Tsar Paul I. So her husband is executed in a military coup, and that's who she is. She's she doesn't get executed, but her husband does. John Adams, just like, you remember I was showing you his grandson earlier was a red 5. I made a mistake earlier. I said James Garfield was the only president to be a red 5. There have been 2. My mistake. I forgot John Adams was a red 5. Just like his grandson, the ambassador, Charles Adams Sr. was a red 5. So yeah, there've been a couple of red 5 presidents. Adams was, he had a different temperament than a lot of the other American revolutionary figures. Resoundingly anti-slavery and yeah, sort of very different from the Virginians, but a smart guy, ethical guy, even though, his presidency was troubled for various reasons. This guy, Frederick the Great, talk about military leaders. This is, the king of all. Even Napoleon thought of this. Napoleon said if this guy had been alive, he never would have been able to conquer Europe. So this is Frederick the Great, also a red 5 interval. And that's it. Those are my red 5 intervals. I've taken you through all of the red 5 intervals I have. Mary Louise is Marie Antoinette's younger sister. I believe you're right about that, B. Havens. Either that or her niece. It's either younger sister or niece. But yeah, it's the same family. She was Austrian. 18th century Goth. I love that. King Charles III of England. He is a white 2. He's a white 2 interval. Yeah. Evolutionary. Now that's catchy. Yeah, I like that. You're looking for aspects with the outers with all those revolutionary and oppositional people, but there seems no solid pattern. Yeah, there's something about the Venus, the Venus retrograde is very much about sort of changing consensus. And for some reason, you see a lot of revolutionaries born in the red intervals because they are sort of agents for change. They want to change how people see the world, change the values that are normalized in a given society. So, right or wrong, that tends to be their urge and their perspective. All right. Maybe I'll also just take you through quickly. Now, of course, Sam and I are covering this to some degree, and he'll be back with me next week to talk about red 5 events. Actually, no, I'm going to save that for next week when Sam's here. What I'm going to do instead is I'll just take you through bear with me here. I know what I'm going to do. So next week, Sam and I are going to talk about the red 5 interval. We're going to pick up where we left off last week and talk about U.S. race relations and all the different sort of events that have happened during red 5 intervals with regard to that subject. It's really, Sam and I will probably have to wind up doing like 3 or 4. I hope he's up for that. It's really nice to have him go through all, that timeline with me. because he's really knowledgeable about the events as well. He's a really good astrologer. And, I always like having, someone like Watson or someone like Sam to get into the nitty gritty with. I never feel I'm quite as good. Any Red 5 scientists? Off the top of my head, no. I'm sure there must be, but that's a good question, Eleanor B. I do want to talk about scientists more. Tupac Shakur was either a blue 5 or a white 1, because he's a Gemini born in 71, and that's right around the time the white 1 interval shifts to a blue 5. I think he's a white 1 interval. So these are all the secretaries of defense and Secretary of War and secretaries of defense in U.S. history. And so you can see this. I won't go through all of them, but there've been a lot of red 5s, and there's even more red 2s. I'd forgotten there's 13 red 2s and only 8 red 5s. I said something like the red 5s were accounted for twice as many, but no, the red 2s have an even heavier concentration. But this gives you an idea. Like this is part of what makes the Venus intervals really compelling for me. And I don't have answers to these questions. These are just questions that I'm sort of investigating. Like, why have there been 13 red 2 secretaries of war or secretaries of defense when there's never been a white 4-1? There's never been a I don't know that. But these are the questions I'm interested in. Why do you get really strong concentrations in some intervals and virtually nothing in others? And with this many, this is all of American history. This is everyone who's ever events in U.S. history. And so it's, 200 plus years of this position in the cabinet. And yet the distribution is really uneven. It's really kind of wild. And it starts to sort of, I like the questions it provokes. I know I don't necessarily have answers to these questions, but this is why I'm so intrigued. And this is part of my reason for doing the live stream, is to sort of investigate these questions, talk out loud about them, and either I can arrive at answers, or maybe someone watching somewhere down the road can arrive at answers. White A, blue 5 for Tupac. Okay. All right. So he is a blue 5. Okay. More people talking about their personal lives. Let's see here. I just wanted to show you French presidents. Oh no, did I forget to share my screen again? So Modern Goldilocks is asking an important question. Most of these red 5 charts have natal Venus in Libra and Virgo with a few Leo. Those born before 1740s are Scorpio. Is that typical for each interval to be born with Venus in a group of signs? Yes. Venus gradually retrogrades through the zodiac. So yeah, that's just it. Before the 1740s, it would be in Scorpio, and then it would gradually retrograde into Libra, and then gradually retrograde into Virgo, and now it's in Leo. Right now, the red 5 interval, the retrograde happens in Leo. Eventually, it's going to wander into Cancer over time. Every 120 years, it changes from one sign to the previous sign. I will. I will eventually get through to scientists. I do have some scientists that I study, but I want to do more. Do I have anything about Marianne Williamson? She's running again for some reason. I'd be interested in how her chart compares with Biden, Kamala, and Kennedy. I have looked at her. She's got a Sun-Uranus conjunction, which I find interesting. Don't forget to share your screen, Nick. Don't you dare forget it. So this is Marianne Williamson. It would be interesting if she wound up in the race because she has a Sun Uranus conjunction, just like Donald Trump. Um, so that would be, if she wound up being the Democratic candidate, you'd have, because I'm pretty, yeah, everyone knows. Not only do I think Trump's going to be the Republican candidate, I think he's going to win. And so it would be interesting if she ran against him and they're both Sun Uranus conjunctions. In terms of comparing her chart to Kamala and Biden, I don't really see the point in that. Oops. Here we are. We don't have a birth time for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for some reason. We've got birth times for most of the Kennedys, but not him. It must be some kind of conspiracy. But here he is. So it's interesting. If you look at him versus Marianne Williamson, they're both born during blue intervals, right? He is a blue 4. He's got the Sun conjunct Venus in Capricorn. He's a blue 4. And she is a blue 3 because she has the Sun conjunct Venus in Cancer. So she's a blue 3. He's a blue 4. She's got Sun conjunct Uranus. He's basically got Sun opposite Uranus, somewhat close. He's born a day before a total solar eclipse. A total lunar eclipse, rather. They're both blue intervals. I don't know, in terms of how things go. Where's Kamala? Oops. There's Kamala. In between a mass murderer in Montreal and the bass player from Metallica, we get Kamala Harris. And Kamala actually lived in Montreal. Kamala and I went to school in the same building circa 1979, 1980. I went to a school called FACE. She went to a school called Mind. This is all true. I went to FACE. She went to Mind. But they were in the same building. FACE still exists in that building. I'm not sure if Mind still exists. I think it was absorbed by FACE or something. But that's Kamala Harris. She's a white 2 interval. For some reason, we don't have a birth time for her. That's curious. She's born in California, but we don't. I've forgotten why that's the case. But if we look at a tri-wheel, the 3 of them, this is what we get. Kamala's just had her second Saturn return, which is interesting. And the second Saturn return always incorporates also a Jupiter return, which usually means they're easier, but not necessarily. And Biden's a blue 2. So Biden's a blue 2, Marianne Williamson's a blue 3, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a blue 4, and Kamala's a white 2. My feeling is, I think there's a really good chance Biden's not going to be running in 2024. That's my take on things. Either because he dies or just like it's just not working out. And it would be interesting if it winds up being Kamala because of that. But either way, I think Trump's going to win. That's what I think. That's the hill I'm dying on somehow. Marianne Williamson's chart is good for the election, better than others. Let's have a look. Marianne Williamson on November 5th, 2024. Okay, yeah, she does have the benefics on the angles. That's all nice and good. Let's see, what perfection year is she going to be in? She's going to be in 72, is that right? Yeah, she'll be 72, which is a first house perfection year. And Mercury and Jupiter on a mutual reception. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. That Marianne Williamson's chart Marianne Williamson's chart does look better for the election than the other candidates. But you know what? Here's the thing. Michael Luton said this to me. This is going to be my closing thought to you guys today. I'm going to sign off after this. But Michael Luton said to me in 2000 when Bush v. Gore was happening, when the election was coming up, before the recount and all that stuff. Al Gore has, I think, a Sun, Moon, Pluto grand trine, fire trine. Right? He's an Aries Sun, Pluto and Leo, Moon and Sagittarius. That's my recollection. And a lot of us thought, oh wow, his chart's really good for the election. He should win. But Michael had this really interesting insight, and this really has proven to be true. And I like the thinking behind it. He says, whenever you're trying to figure out the outcome of an American election or something of that nature, look for whoever's going to have the hardest transits in the next 4 years. And that's going to be the person, because whoever gets elected president suddenly has the world on their shoulders, and this is true whether you're Trump, Biden, Obama, and it doesn't matter. I don't care. You love the person, you can't stand them. Doesn't matter. They're going to have the world on their shoulders, and their transits are going to be hard. And someone whose transits look good or positive or what have you, that does not necessarily mean they're going to win the election. It probably means they lose, because there's no way a president's going to have things that easy. You lose a presidential election, hey, you get a book deal, or you make a documentary or whatever. Life goes on. But you get elected president, and then your life really goes to shit. So I agree. Marianne Williamson's transits do look actually quite nice on election day, and I hope if she's the candidate that she wins, but I just don't think that's the case. Oh, S.J. Anderson's theory of how a Democrat is going to win. Yeah. Look, I told SJ I'm rooting for him, even though he and I are not necessarily competing, but we have we have competing theories on how the election's going to play out. One of us is going to be wrong. One of us is going to be right, unless a Republican wins, but it's not Trump, in which case both of us will be wrong. But I'm saying it's Trump because of the whole Uranus and Gemini thing, which I think is a case I've laid out again and again, and I don't need to repeat. SJ's theory, well, not theory, it's an observation, and it's a good one, is that whenever there's been a U.S. election while Saturn's in Pisces, the incumbent has always won. And so at least the incumbent party, if not candidate. So on that basis, because currently it's a Democratic president who's incumbent, his reasoning being, since Saturn will still be in Pisces by election time, that means the incumbent will win. I sure hope he's right. I'm talking about Uranus. He's talking about Saturn. So yeah, that's basically it. I think his theory is good. I don't agree with it, but it's a well-reasoned observation. And if he turns out to be right, I will not only be happy with the outcome, but also we'll have this very sort of a really nicely anchored guidepost to take us through whatever the U.S. election's going through 30 years after 2024. Could it be that Trump will win, but he dies shortly after and there's a revolution? Yeah. Anything like that is possible, Elsa. as I like to point out, like I am predicting Trump for the election because he's got that Sun Uranus North Node conjunction in Gemini, and Uranus in Gemini has this really important ongoing role with U.S. history. But during the U.S. Civil War, it was Jefferson Davis who was the Gemini Sun who had Uranus conjunct his Sun. He was becoming a president, but not of the United States, but of the Confederacy. In the American Revolutionary War, it was, you had King George III was a Gemini Sun who had Uranus conjunct his Sun when the colonists signed a treaty with France and ultimately turned the tide of the war against him. But also, what's his name? Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick, what's his name? Sometimes I just blank on names for no good reason. I have too much in my head. Who's the American revolutionary who said, give me liberty or give me death? And his name is Patrick. Come on, guys. Come on. No one? Bueller. All right, fine. I'll look it up myself. Yeah, Barbeau, the astrologer. That's the guy whose name I was trying to think of. Thank you. Patrick. Blank on this guy's name. Super famous. Super famous. Important revolutionary. Patrick Henry. Thank you. Patrick Henry. All right, guys. Well, you came up with it by the time I was looking it up, but we'll share credit on finding that. Yeah, Andre Barbeau, the astrologer you were referring to yesterday. Right. I remember you brought him up yesterday. I forgot with regard to what. Chat must be slow because, okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. I think I'm out of steam. I've run almost 2 hours today. I think this might be one of the longest solo streams I've done so far. The basket in 2026. Oh, do you mean that the guillotine basket also? Is that what you mean? Oh no, the basket. Yeah. The I know what you mean. The planetary basket in 2026. Okay. Yeah, it's been a while since I read Barbeau, but obviously he became really topical again when COVID broke out because he had predicted that effectively. So he's got a good track record right now, and I certainly always thought highly of his work. All right, my voice is going. I've got a client booked in less than an hour, so I got to give myself a little rest because I've got clients this afternoon. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. I will be back with Patrick next Sunday at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern, and then with Sam a week from today, an hour earlier than the usual start time to accommodate his schedule, and we'll get back on track talking about Venus retrograde, Red 5, and American race relations. So thank you all. I hope this has been entertaining and interesting for you. Thank you so much for indulging me and just letting me ramble for 2 hours, and for all your contributions. And yeah, I will see you next week. Have yourselves a terrific week, and thank you. Bye for now.